I'm now going to do another demo. I go into the Manage Payment Blocks app F0593 and select the supplier 1000311. In this app, the options for filtering, sorting and grouping are not as obvious as in many other apps. At the bottom is a button that I can use for sorting and another that I can use for grouping, and at the top are options to filter by. I can filter by, for example, status or payment block, or I can filter by company code. I can block the whole supplier by clicking on the Block Supplier button at the bottom, and the interesting thing here is that I can enter a note about why I'm blocking the supplier, as well as choose a payment block reason. I can block individual invoices by selecting them and clicking on the Block Item button, and again I can enter the type of payment block as well as a reason. I have another Sort button at the top of the items, and I can use the Settings button to add or remove columns, although in this case they've all been already selected. Most of the items shown in blue will allow me to drill down into them for further information by selecting an app. But in this case, I'm going to select the material document number itself to take me to the supplier invoice details. If I scroll down, I can look at the purchase order history of each line item. This particular item was manually blocked, but if I choose another one with an automatic block and do the same thing, going into the blue number, but this time click on the blue Blocked for Payment button at the top of the invoice, it gives me more detail about the specific payment block. You can see here that there are several different blocks for price and quantity, but even the first item, which is correct, and does not have its own block, has a temporary FI block because it cannot be included in the payment run because all the other items in the invoice are blocked. If I scroll down further, there are some KPI charts. If anything is unclear, I can go back one step and check the purchase order history. Also, from this app I can jump directly to the supplier fact sheet by drilling down on the blue supplier numbers. This shows both master data and summary transactions. To see the payment block that was activated in the Manage Payment Block app in the supplier master data, or to block or unblock there instead, you have to go into the company code automatic payment transaction section. Note that this payment block has a code, in this case B. The other master data blocks are either block the account or not. There's not a choice of code. Note that blocking the account in Manage Payment Blocks shows a message next to each invoice as account blocked in the automatic payment program, but still allows you to post new invoices. New invoices posted after the account has been blocked will be automatically blocked for payment. To put a payment block for a supplier everywhere, you block the account partway down the Basic Data section in the Supplier Master Data app by selecting the relevant checkbox. The block shows as a yes or no once saved. If you want to completely prevent purchases in the first place, perhaps because the supplier is unreliable, you can use the F1053A Supplier Master app and put a central purchasing block. In the same app, you can put either a central posting block or a company code posting block, perhaps because you want all postings to be made to a different supplier account if this one is incorrect. Note that if you only put a block on the account at company code level, you can still enter a purchase order and post a goods receipt. However, you will not be able to post the invoice, payment, or process any clearing. Another view of where you can block an account is the Maintain Business Partner Master Data app, where you have similar options. For example, central posting block, central purchasing block, and company code posting block. You can block a supplier for one or all company codes and one or all purchasing organisation. This slide is using the Maintain Business Partner app based on the GUI transaction BP. You can also see the payment block in the vendor payment transactions for the company code in the same app, Maintain Business Partner. And here are the purchasing options. In section 2, I mentioned that you can switch on dual confirmation for sensitive fields. This functionality is activated at client level, and you can choose which fields you deem to be sensitive. Any fields designated as sensitive, usually those related to the bank account, must be confirmed by a second person in order for any runs for that supplier to be picked up by the automatic payment run. If a field has been changed and not confirmed, the invoice will be shown as an exception in the payment run, and you should see an error message related to the fact that the supplier has not been confirmed. We will cover the Manage Supplier Line Item app now, as it's useful for looking at specific supplier details if there's a query with payment. And it also lets you block or unblock items and do some editing. There's a separate section on reporting which will cover several aging, payables and other supplier reports. This slide shows an example of grouping by supplier. You can sort by company code and whether account or items are blocked or not. In contrast to the Manage Payment Block report, it shows a lot more columns, plus you have more selection criteria such as paid, open, parked, etc. And you can also edit a line item or choose a number of line items to mass edit, which might be useful if you need to change payment details such as terms, discounts, payment methods, house bank, and so on. We will see how to do this shortly in the demo. There is a similar app called Manage Customer Line Items. Where money is owed to the customer, it can be deducted from any outstanding invoices due on the customer account, for example for refunds or sales, credit memos, or a payment can be sent to the customer account, either because there are no invoices to deduct from, but also because some customers may prefer to receive physical payment for certain types of payment, such as for rebates or promotional items, rather than netting them off against sales. Some organisations prefer to keep sales-related payments under the customer account, but it's also possible to set up a customer as a supplier and either pay the supplier account as normal or net off the two. In any case, you can link the outstanding payable and receivable items to ensure that you do not make a payment for the payables when the same business partner has not been paying the receivables side. We'll see how to include a customer account in the automatic payment and manual payment programs shortly. I'm going to do a quick demo of the Supplier Line Items app, F0712. I can choose one or all suppliers, or I can search by name or search term using the drop-down. I can choose suppliers from a specific country, postal code, or use the Conditions tab and drop-down. I can add more filters to restrict either by master data fields or transactions. Already in the filter bar, I have the status, currently showing just open items and the item type, and just normal items, although I could include, for example, parked or custom items as well. As I have company code OF01 set in my defaults, I didn't need to type that in, and also today's date appears as default. I press go and you can see a number of columns. I can quickly group, filter or sort by clicking the top of the column, and I can drag and drop columns to different places. I can select anything in blue and go to that item directly by clicking on the number at the top, or choose one of the apps to jump to. I can also add more apps to quickly jump to by clicking on the More Links button. Note that if I select a journal number, it shows me only the supplier line item, but at the bottom I can click on Back to Journal Entry to get the overview of all the items in the journal. The back arrow takes me back to the Supplier Line Items app. Selecting one or more items and clicking on Edit Line Items gives a pop-up where you can change fields for all selected items. Be very careful that you have the correct selection, because as soon as you click OK, it changes all those items. There's no "Are you sure?" pop-up. You can also select an item and just click on Block and Unblock, but be careful as you will not see here whether an item is already blocked automatically. You can either add the column item payment block or go into one item at a time and check the block in Edit Line Item. Note that the supplier payment block column is only for when the whole supplier account is blocked. Next, I click on the Settings button. If I want to add the item payment block, I simply select the checkbox, and if I want to move it to the second column, I can either move it column by column or use the double arrow to go to the top, i.e. column 1, and then the single arrow to go down one at a time. Back in the settings, the Sort tab allows me to sort by a number of columns at the same time by clicking on the plus sign to add sort criteria. The Filter tab allows me to set up conditions to include or exclude. I could take a look at the invoices likely to be picked up by the payment run prior to running the proposal by going to the Filter tab and setting a condition for items with a net due date on or before the end of the month. In the Group tab, I can group by supplier, or I could set up a whole hierarchy, for example, company code, supplier, document type, and so on. Which looks like this, and of course I can drag the width of the columns as required. If I want more room, I can hide the filter bar. I can also save the layout by clicking on the layout and save as. I can choose to have it as my default or make it public. I can do the same thing with the filter criteria, in other words, save a specific selection. Most outgoing payments, excluding payroll, in a company will be made to suppliers, and due to the sheer quantity will probably be made using the automatic payment program. Based on the entered parameters, the system proposes a list of invoices which are due for payment for you to review and edit as required. Once approved, a payment file or payment media are produced and the payment run is posted and the invoices are cleared automatically. If travel expenses are posted to an employee vendor account, they can be treated in a similar way to an invoice, and payments made to employees using the automatic payment program. In some cases, a payment may be booked directly to the general ledger without the involvement of accounts payable. But apart from the taxes themselves, you would normally post everything in accounts payable for the VAT register and better control. Using the Create Single Payment functionality, you can create a down payment or pay a single invoice and have manual payments cover everything else. For example, payments that have been made outside the system. We will go into a lot more detail for each payment type, starting with the automatic payment program. In order to make a payment automatically in S/4HANA, the automatic payment program requires a document to exist in the system, with the amount payable when the payment is due, as well as information on who to pay and how. Some of this information will be entered manually when the invoice is posted, for example the amount payable, and some information will be transferred to the invoice at the time of posting from the vendor master data. For example, the payment terms and method. The rest of the information will be called from the vendor master data at the time of payment. To create a payment run, first enter the parameters of what you want to pay. For example, a range of suppliers in company code X that have payment method Y and are due before date Z. You can also select one document or a range of documents or use other criteria. The system then automatically selects all invoices that conform to that criteria and creates a payment proposal for review. You can delete and recreate or edit the proposal as often as you want prior to creating the payment run. But as the payment updates the accounts, once the payment run is created, it cannot be physically deleted. It can be reversed, but it may not be easy to do so, especially if payment media has already been created. Technically, you could run the payment run directly without creating the proposal, but this is not really recommended. If you made a mistake in the parameters or master data, you might pay or omit suppliers or invoices that you didn't intend to. If you are using the automatic payment program, you need a payment method, usually set in the supplier master record, but you can override the supplier payment method by entering a different method in the document. For example, to use a quicker but perhaps more expensive method in an urgent case. Payment methods vary depending on the country and currency. SEPA allows euro payments to be made across borders, mainly within Europe, and BACS is only for GBP in the UK. Although some countries still use cheques, most of the remaining payments involve transferring payments between different banks at varying speeds. You can specify mandatory fields for each payment method in the configuration, for example, the IBAN number or the SWIFT code. The slide shows some US payment methods. Incoming payment methods can also be used with the automatic payment program, for example, to collect direct debits from customers. You can also enter payment methods for information only, even if you don't use the automatic payment program for that method, or only use it for clearing. For example, if you regularly pay the supplier by direct debit, you can post an invoice and just use the automatic payment program to clear the invoice, or alternatively, you can clear the invoice manually. There needs to be a strict segregation of duties to avoid fraud. particularly around payments. In other words, one person should not be responsible for master data, posting invoices and posting payments. An organisation may have some sort of master data governance set up to ensure the integrity of the supplier master data, as well as a separate approval system to check the validity of the payments. There are a number of different ways this can be achieved, both in SAP S/4HANA and outside, depending on the software used to send the payment file to the bank. So I won't be able to go into all the different possibilities here. You can also split the authorizations inside the payment program so that different people can create the proposal, revise the proposal, post the payment run, and manage the payment media. One thing to stress is that there should be a proper procedure and approval process, with the appropriate segregation of duties in place for all payments, not just automatically generated ones. After all, there's no point in having strict control over your automatic payments if it's all too easily bypassed to make manual payments without approval. There are different approaches to making payments. I've known some companies dedicate specific days to payments. For example, in one company, everybody knew the payment run was on Wednesday, and that if they wanted something paid, it had to be ready before Wednesday. Another company paid, for example, domestic payments on Monday, foreign payments on Tuesday, direct debits on Wednesday, employee travel expenses on Thursday, and intercompany on Friday. Another company set payment terms as 15 days after the end of a month, to have one payment run in the middle of the month for everything. It totally depends on your organisation, the number of vendors, the typical payment terms with your vendors, different payment methods, cash flow, availability of approvers, and so on. There are a number of dates to be careful of. The first is the run date, which is part of the identifier of the payment run, and is usually the day you start the run and cannot later be changed, although you can create a new one. The documents entered up to date usually defaults to this as well. If you create the proposal, payment run, and payment media all on the same day, then you can use the current date everywhere. If you create a payment run on Monday and then review it and on Tuesday decide an urgent invoice is missing that needs to be included, when you cancel and rerun the payment proposal to pick up the missing invoice, you need to change the documents entered up to date to Tuesday, if that is the date that the invoice was posted. Otherwise it will ignore it even if the due date indicates that it should be included. The next payment date is used instead of a due by date, but with a bit of flexibility. Let's say that you pay vendors every Wednesday. If you tell the system that the next payment date is next Wednesday, it will include any invoices that are not yet due for payment today, but that are due for payment before next Wednesday, so that you stay within the due date and can catch any relevant cash discounts. However, if you don't generally rush to pay suppliers and would rather pay a few days late rather than a few days earlier, you can play around with the date, but it cannot be the same or before the posting date. If your company has configured a tolerance for the cash discount, for example of 2 days, it means that the system will still deduct the cash discount even if you pay up to 2 days after the agreed terms for the cash discount. Cash discount is discount that you can only deduct if you pay early. You can also set a minimum amount in the configuration, for example to ignore a payment if it's under $5. You also need to think in advance about the date on which you want the bank to execute the payment. Depending on the size of the payment run and the average number of queries, you may want to run the proposal a day or two in advance of when you want to send it to the bank. You may also be able to send it to the bank one day, but with the required execution date the following day. In the slide, you can see that in the XML file sent to the bank, the requested execution date for this payment method is the posting date. Note that this may vary depending on how the payment method has been configured, so best to check or test it if you're not sure. If you create the payment proposal on Monday but only send it to the bank on Wednesday, it may well be rejected if you still have a required execution date as Monday. You can of course change the date, but changing the parameters usually means cancelling the proposal and rerunning it, and you'll have to block again any items blocked in the first proposal, plus the new proposal may pick up additional items that have either since been posted or since been unblocked since the first proposal. I am now going to do a payment proposal and payment run using the Manage Automatic Payments app F0770. As usual, the first screen is the overview page, where you can see all the payment proposals for a specific date range, for example this year. I find it much easier than the classic GUI transaction, as in addition to the run date and ID, you can now see a lot more detail when searching for a specific payment run, such as company code, who created it, what the payment method is, and so on. I will click on the plus button to create the parameters for a new proposal. The run date defaults as today's date, and I have a habit of entering my initials and the sequential number as the ID. But given that I can find my payment runs easily using the created by parameter, you can use any type of alphanumeric code that you wish to identify the specific run, bearing in mind that it's the combination of date and ID that must be unique, so you can use the sequential numbers starting at the number 1 every day. I enter the company code and are far enough ahead the next payment date to pick up any invoices during the next few months, plus a payment method I. Normally you wouldn't have a payment date so far ahead, it's just because I'm running it in the sandbox. I'm entering one vendor number, but you would probably enter the full range. I could restrict the payment run further by filling, for example, a document number in the free selection, or choosing the option Others, where there are a lot of other fields that I could use. Most important is to say yes to the additional log. I save the parameters, and I'm now ready to schedule the proposal run. As the name implies, the proposal run is just going to show me the items that the system thinks are due. I can edit the proposal and block invoices if they're under query, or if I want to restrict the money being paid out. Equally, I can print the report for somebody else to check and edit. Be careful to schedule only the proposal at this stage and not the actual payment run. It defaults to start immediately, or I could schedule it for a later time if I wanted to. Note that if there is an open payment proposal, in other words a payment where the proposal has been created but the payment run has not been scheduled and the payment has not been posted, then any items in that proposal will not appear in a new run. In other words, you should delete any open proposals that are not in use, or complete them before creating another payment run with similar criteria. Having open parameters does not affect the current proposal though. The overview will show that the proposal is running. I can refresh by pressing the Go button until it shows proposal created. I will click on the right-hand arrow under the revised column to see what has been selected. At the top you can see the number of payments and the number of exceptions. I can open each payment document to see which invoices have been selected, and if I want to block them I can easily do so by selecting the boxes on the left and clicking on Block. This is very difficult to do in the classic GUI transaction, by the way. I can select all or select or deselect one or more. The block here only lasts until I either cancel the proposal or post it. If I recreate the proposal, I will have to recreate the blocks. I can also go to the Exceptions tab to review the invoices that have been ignored. I can see that some of the invoices have been automatically blocked during the three-way matching, meaning that there is either a price or quantity difference compared to what has been approved and received. Some invoices have also been manually blocked. You can also see the items blocked in the payment run. There is also another error which is not very explicit, and it tells me to read the log. To get to the log, I have to go back a step to the overview page. If I need to check the parameters, I can do so by clicking on the identification. If I scroll down, there seems to be something wrong with the configuration of one of the bank accounts. And also the account for cash discount is incorrectly set up to expect a tax code. There is also a separate app, Revise Payment Proposals F0771, which allows access to revise the payment proposal, but not to create or schedule proposal or payment runs. Note that on the overview page, the payment is now showing payment updated. If I'm happy with the proposal, I can now schedule the payment run by selecting it and clicking on Schedule Payment Run. This is the part which updates the supplier account and the general ledger with the payment and normally produces the payment media. If I go back one step, I can click on the PDF icon to produce a report of the payment list, which I can download by clicking on the down arrow, or I can print it. On the overview screen, I can see that no payment media is showing as created, so I go to the log. The log shows the document numbers of the payments that were posted, and that the payment media file has been created. Towards the bottom of the log, it gives me an error about the incomplete configuration in my training system around the remittance forms, which I expected as I've not set them up fully yet. I go back to the overview screen. Sometimes it takes a while to complete the payment media creation, so I click on the Go button again to refresh. Now I can see that the payment media, i.e. the bank transfer file, has been created. It just took a while. A couple of other things I can do while on this screen is to go to Settings and add columns, sort or filter. The filter here is better as I can include or exclude more items than on the current filter bar. I can also group, for example by payment media or created by and so on. If I select a payment run and click on Open, the payment list is the same as if I drill down on the line. But the application log here is easier to read than the one in the line item, and in some places gives slightly more detail. For example, you can click on the items in blue to see more information, and you can export it to Excel. At the end of this section, There's a subsection on troubleshooting to help you work out why a particular item is not being paid, or what some of the different error messages mean. I'm using the term payment media to cover everything that's typically produced by the payment program. For example, a bank payment file, checks, and payment devices. Depending on the organisation, payment or remittance devices are not always used, especially if sufficient information about the payment can be included in the payment file that's sent to the bank. A legal requirement in some countries. Normally, the payment media is produced automatically when the payment run is posted. You can go into the payment media either by clicking on the payment media button in the completed payment run, or by entering the app Manage Payment Media F1868 directly. The app shows new items which have not been downloaded, as well as items that have already been downloaded to transfer to the bank and which have been processed. You can drill down to the detail by clicking on the reference number. To download, simply select the file and click Download. Once downloaded, I can display the file depending on the format. This file, for example, is in XML format. Once downloaded, as you can see, it transfers to the downloaded area. Sometimes payment may be required in full, in advance, or as an initial instalment before work is started, and in some cases the invoice is not received until later, perhaps only when the work is completed. Because the automatic payment program cannot pay anything unless there is a document for it to pick up, and also because if the payment is material, you do not necessarily want to reduce the total outstanding payables in the balance sheet, you can use instead the down payment functionality. This produces a payment request, which is a kind of dummy document whose sole purpose is to trigger the automatic payment program to make a payment. It still posts the payment to the supplier account, but instead of linking to the normal payables account in the general ledger, instead it links to a special down payment account in the balance sheet. There are several different ways to post down payments. The first is using the Manage Down Payments Request app, which is similar to the classic GUI transactions, a bit like creating a journal line item, which is then picked up by the automatic payment program. The header contains the dates, company code and currency, and the line item simply contains the supplier account number, the amount and tax code. The special GL indicator will be the one that appears when the payment is made. When this document is saved, the special GL indicator will show only as F, meaning that it's still a request and not a proper posting. After saving and going back into the document, you can see that it only has the one line item, which doesn't update the general ledger, but you can see it in the supplier line items. Posting is to the supplier account, but you can see that the general ledger account that it's linked to is not the normal accounts payable reconciliation account, but the down payments account instead. The next step is to run the automatic payment program, which will pick up this credit entry on the supplier account as if it's a supplier invoice, and post a debit, in other words payment on account, on the supplier account instead. When the invoice is received, it can be cleared against the down payment. Another way of creating a down payment and a down payment request is using the Create Single Payment functionality, which we will cover next. And as part of this functionality, you'll see more down payment entries, as well as the down payment request being picked up by the automatic payment program and later cleared. The Create Single Payment functionality can be launched directly from the app, in which case only a down payment is created. If you launch it from the Manage Supplier Line Items app, then you can choose to pay either a single invoice or create a down payment. Note that the slide shows the maximum functionality, but you can configure the system, for example, to create only a down payment request rather than the full payment, or just to post the payment and not create the payment media. In earlier versions, the app used to be called Create Manual Payment. I will demonstrate first a single payment directly from the Create Single Payment app F0743. As there are some restrictions around the US taxes, I'm using a UK company code so that I can demonstrate the tax entry, but each country will have its own rules about when and how tax can be calculated and paid. When I enter the company code and the supplier number, the supplier and bank details are filled in automatically. I enter the standard tax code for the UK. I could enter the tax amount here, or I could click on Calculate Tax after I enter the gross amount. I enter the amount. I'll also enter the payment method here. And press Create, and the document number 17000008 is created. I will just go to the supplier line items so that you can have a look at it. I enter the same company code OF02 and 100312, and in addition to normal items, I will select noted items as well as special GL transactions, because the down payment request counts as a noted item. It's a kind of statistical or single entry journal and does not update the general ledger until payment's made. If I go to the Manage Journal Entries app, you can see that there is only one line item. As it's not a proper journal, it does not have to be a double entry. However, it does have a special GL indicator F, which is a down payment request. I'm going to copy the document number so that I can select it in the automatic payment program to pay it. In the automatic payment program, I select the dates, company code, payment method, and supplier, and then the document number in the free selection option, so that I can paste the document number I just copied from the down payment request. I then schedule the proposal. In the overview screen, I have to change the company code from my default to OF02, and then on the Proposals Process tab I can see the payment. I open it to check, and it all looks okay, so I will schedule the payment posting run. And as you can see, the payment has been posted. I left open the Supplier Line Items app, so I'll go back there now. The original request was a credit which acted the same way as an invoice would to be paid by the payment program. I will refresh by clicking on Go, and you can now see that instead of the original credit, we have a proper debit entry of 120, which is updating the general ledger and now has a special GL indicator of A. A indicates that it's a down payment and that the posting has a different general ledger account number than the standard entries for that supplier. If I now click on the document number to go to the Manage Journal Entry app, you can see the supplier debit entry is to account 12110000, which is the down payments account instead of the normal domestic payable reconciliation account, with the other side of the journal to the bank clearing. The second type of manual payment can be made directly from the Manage Supplier Line Items app for just one invoice where perhaps an urgent invoice was missed off the automatic payment run and you don't want to go through the whole automatic payment process. But the invoice exists and the system is working fine, so you can still produce the payment from the system. It creates an automatic payment run with one click and posts and creates payment media at the same time. Note that this specific example is not a down payment request, but clears the invoice, and I can only use this for one invoice at a time. If I select more than one invoice, it will change into a down payment and not clear the invoice. Obviously, you need to set up some sort of controls and approval process for this if you do use it. In the Manage Supplier Line Items app, I simply select the invoice that I want to pay and click on the button Create Single Payment. On the next screen, you'll see that everything has been completed, including the amounts, and the invoice number has been selected. If I now click on Create and then Accept, the payment is created. Note that the payment program ID is M000. I go to the automatic payment program and you can see that a new payment run has been created using the ID M000. If I drill down into it, I can see the invoice number that has been paid. Of course, there is still the payment media to send to the bank if it's not automatic, but there's no further action required in the payment program to complete the payment. If I now go to Manage Supplier Line Items, the invoice is no longer showing as open, and if I select Cleared Items, you can see that the invoice and the payment have now been cleared with the same clearing document number, which is the payment journal. As I mentioned before, you can also configure the system to simply create a down payment request instead, and then have the automatic payment run pick up request as part of the normal payment run. Here I changed the configuration briefly so that I could show a down payment request. You can see that only a down payment request has been posted compared to the message in the demo which shows that a payment has been posted and gives the payment run message. I'll have to create an automatic payment run proposal and then post it in order for a payment to be made in this case. So here, I'm using the automatic payment run to pay the down payment request. Note that once the down payment request is paid, the entries are similar to the demo. In other words, the supplier account will have a payment posted, but the related reconciliation account will be the down payment account instead. Here you can see the supplier line items showing two items. One is a down payment and the other is a down payment request. You can see that the full down payment shows a credit to a bank control account and a debit to the supplier, but with the down payment reconciliation account instead of with the normal domestic accounts payable reconciliation account. For the down payment request, because it's only statistical and does not update the general ledger and trial balance, it does not have to balance and has only a dummy posting to the supplier so that the payment program has a document to pay. In the previous cases where a down payment has been made, the next step will normally be to post the invoice that's related to the down payment. When you enter an invoice to the supplier account that has down payments, you will automatically get an information message that the supplier account has down payments on it, along with the total amount of down payments. You can go into the app Clear Outgoing Payments F1367 to clear the two. In the app, you need to make sure that you select down payments in the line item type field in the filter bar, and then click on the arrow at the right end of the down payment that you want to select. We will go into more detail and a demo with this app shortly, but for the moment I'll just explain the process. The down payment is selected at the top, and the items to match it against are in the lower left section of the screen. If the invoice and down payment match, you simply click on Clear. Sometimes the down payment will be for a partial amount, for example where the supplier has a lot of costs that we need to pay up front. In this case, I've made a down payment of 100, but the invoice is 500. I click on Clear, and then on the right-hand side I change the allocated amount from 500 to 100. If I simulate, you'll see that the system posts a journal clearing the down payment reconciliation account and updating the standard accounts payable reconciliation account. When I post the clearing, the document for the down payment will be cleared and a new document will be posted in its place. If I now go to the Manage Supplier Line Items app, you can see the two items on the account, the invoice and the new document for payment. The new document will reference the invoice so that they will either both be selected in a payment run or neither. If I drill down to the payment line item, you can see the reference to the invoice, and you can see that the related GL account is now the accounts payable domestic account and no longer the down payment GL account. For the purposes of this slide, I'm using the term manual payments to encompass everything that's not using the automatic payment program or the Create Single Payment app. You can make manual payments for several different reasons, hopefully mainly as exceptions, as the most efficient way would normally be to pay automatically. I will give some examples of the different reasons. The first example covers direct debits and standing orders which are paid automatically by the bank. In the UK, a standing order for a fixed amount is paid out automatically by your own bank, whereas a direct debit can be a fixed or variable amount that is collected by the bank of the supplier, subject to specific agreements. In Europe, SAP direct debits are used frequently, but their use in other countries varies. The payment media is not created by the system, so the main task is to simply ensure that the related invoice and the direct debit or standing order is posted to the supplier account, then to clear them against each other. In the second example, for speed, an urgent payment is made directly with the bank, so again the main task is to clear the vendor account afterwards. In the third, an unusual payment method is required. Perhaps a payment out of a bank that is not set up for the automatic payment program, or for a particular method that's so rarely used it's not been set up, or for a brand new payment method which has not yet been fully set up. Technically, you can use the automatic payment program just for the clearing, without producing a new payment, but many companies prefer to manually clear each item on a daily basis for greater control. If you use the automatic payment program, you must take care to use a payment method that's not set to create payment media, so that you don't pay it twice. We will go into the exact postings later in this section, but it's worth mentioning at this point that all payments have at least two postings. One between the payee and the bank control account, and one between the bank control account and the actual main bank account when the bank statement's posted. Automatic payments update the vendor and the bank control automatically, but sometimes a separate department might be responsible for the posting of the manual payments to the supplier account for accounts payable to process the clearing in a separate step. In other cases, accounts payable may be responsible for the posting between the bank controller and the supplier, in which case the clearing of the supplier can be made at the same time as the posting in a single step. This app can be used for clearing any payments that are outstanding on a vendor account, usually ones that were not made with the automatic payment program, as they would normally clear the invoices and themselves automatically. An example might be where the payment is posted to the supplier account by one department, and accounts payable just need to clear the payment against the relevant invoice or invoices, or where a down payment has been made and the invoice has been posted but the two are still open. Technically, if you don't post an invoice to the supplier account, you could post a journal directly to the relevant cost account, but those costs would not be included in any spend or vendor reports or the VAT register. I'm going to demonstrate using the Clear Outgoing Payments app F1367. I'll run it for company code OF02 as I know I have some open payments there. The app picks up the open payments. I'm just going to select the small £100 one and click on the right-hand arrow of the line item. On the left are all the possible items that I can clear with the 100. If the item matched exactly, I can just clear it, but the only invoices available are the amounts of 500 and 120, so I'll have to do a partial payment. I select the invoice I want to partially clear and click on the Clear button. This moves it to the right-hand side where I change the allocated amount to the amount of the payment, in other words 100. I can also pull in items from other suppliers by clicking on the left on the More button and enter the new supplier number, even in another company code if cross-company code postings are permitted. I could also move the right-hand side to full screen, where there is more information if required, for example reason codes for any difference or cash discount that was not calculated automatically. With a partial payment, you can see the payment and the original invoice. Another way to post a partial payment, local legislation permitting, is to post a residual payment, where the invoice and payment are cleared and only a residual amount is posted back to the account. You can enter the residual amount, in this case 20, in the residual amount column and remove the allocated amount to do this. Note that the document type and due date of the residual amount may not match that of the original invoice. If I had left the allocated amount as 120, it means that I would have had a difference which I could post directly to a GL account if allowed. For example, small differences if the amount was only rounding, or a write-off account if that was appropriate, although normally you would expect to supply a credit note if there was some sort of query. I can see that the balance at the top right has now gone green and shows 0, meaning the posting balances, and I can now simulate or directly post.